From Impact Alpha, it's This Week in Impact, where we bring you some of the most interesting impact investing stories of the week. It's Friday, June 13th. I'm Brian Walsh, and I'm joined this week by Impact Alpha editor David Bank. We'll discuss turning the stranded pipeline of green loans into investable deal flow for private capital. Plus, for European investors, material risks are still material. And finally, look what you made them do. Taylor Swift, Ryan Coogler, and the emerging ownership economy in music and film. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Hi, David. How are you doing this week? Happy Friday the 13th.
Oh, that's so spooky, Brian. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. I was in New York this week, and I got to meet some of our listeners at the Impact Capital Managers Network gathering they had there. It's really great to be with some folks who listen to the podcast.
Yeah, it's always great to meet our listeners. Sometimes people recognize me by my laugh from the podcast.
Well, you do have a distinct laugh there, so that's good. All right, well, let's turn to this week's top stories. First up, turning the stranded pipeline of green loans into an investable deal flow for private capital. While the Trump administration continues its efforts to claw back some $20 billion in federal funding that had been allocated to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as part of the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, efforts are underway to mobilize more private capital to step into the breach and back the bankable projects, a number of which had already been identified. David, we had a call this week with leaders of several efforts who are simultaneously fighting the Trump administration in court while also looking to marshal private financing in case the federal funding doesn't come through. So, what do we learn?
Yeah, it was one of the more exciting things that's I've been part of recently because, as you say, like so many things, it's been frozen, cut, canceled, sued. This $20 billion that was going to really ramp up a kind of green lending infrastructure for very grassroots kind of community projects. This is a community solar and energy retrofits and electric vehicles. Electric trucking is a big area. And it's obviously been all held up. And you'd think that everybody'd be kind of, nursing their wounds and rueing the misfortune. But instead, everybody is fired up to keep that momentum going. And the point is kind of that this green, rebuild is not going away. Like the economics are so compelling for some of these projects in terms of the lifetime cost of operating, say an electric truck versus a diesel truck, or obviously solar versus other sources of power, that those projects, are going to happen. And the question is, how fast can they roll out? And in particular, to what extent can they roll out to lower income and historically marginalized communities. And so we had Beth Baffert from Climate United, which has really been leading this legal battle, also got the most money out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Some $7 billion was awarded and is now mostly tied up at Citibank. And here's what she had to say.
The whole reason we exist is to lean in to these challenges and opportunities when others lean out. And so there is a lot of leaning out happening right now. There's a lot of leaning out on all sorts of things, right? On clean energy financing, on opportunities in low-income and disadvantaged communities, in thinking about investments in a more equitable future. And so we need to lean in regardless of what is happening in Washington and the policy implications. And that's where this industry shines.
All right, so what are we talking about, David? What's needed here?
What we're talking about, Brian, is a pipeline of billions of dollars in deals. And these deals have been vetted, diligenced, in many cases, underwritten with stacks of capital, with different kinds of risk mitigation and different kinds of investors. And they were essentially ready to go. Amir Kirkwood of Justice Climate Fund looked at the pipeline that they had attracted. They had gotten something like almost $1 billion to help CDFIs and other lenders get this money moving. And they identified $1 billion that could basically be financed right now, kind of on commercial terms, and another $7 billion that, with a little bit of catalytic capital would be viable as well. So if you think of it in some ways, there's a gap in the market, but that's an opportunity for other investors to step in and in many cases on commercial terms or in other cases on somewhat concessional terms to get just a whole flood of projects going. And at some level, we can get this green lending transformation that the GGRF was supposed to occasion. We could sort of have it with private capital and certainly with impact investors. Here's Amir Kirkwood.
JCF is recognizing the moment that we're in and what is really sort of a profound transition that's going on as a result of the moment we're in. The solutions are going to be increasingly local, and it's time to get ahead as much as we can of helping those local partners to define what financing looks like for their communities. And I think also really beginning to think about the fact that clean energy financing can be uh, less viewed as it has often in the community development space as an add-on and more viewed as the driver behind how communities will be revitalized.
All right. So if the goal is to get green financing to the local communities where it's needed most, it sounds like it's the federal funding that is at stake here is not the only kind of capital that's available.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what, again, that's what impact investors and these community lenders have been doing for years, is putting together all kinds of different sources of capital. So there's still state and local financing. There's affordable housing that for which energy retrofits and clean energy sources could be an add-on to that. Sort of financing for federally qualified community health clinics. Again, you can save them money in the long term on their utility bills. And so being creative and probably dogged in a way, to fill these gaps, but with sort of all the different angles that you can work. And again, I think what I sensed, both on the call, but also just around the ecosystem is a kind of a persistence in the face of this adversity. Curtis Probst from NYSEG, which is the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, a big housing lender, maybe put it best on the call.
Yeah, I mean, GGRF is transformational. It's $20 billion between the two competitions that we've been focused on here, or $27 billion if you also include the Solar for All competition, which is monies going to state and local governments. So, yes, it makes a huge difference. But, the clean energy transition order of magnitude is, trillions of dollars per year globally. So there is a lot of capital out there, and there are a lot of projects that still can get funded. Projects that we look at fit on a continuum, and some of them could only be financed with GGRF, and others can be financed, with other sources of capital. So that just gives you a sense of the context. And certainly we see, a lot of projects that are penciling out well now.
All right. So, David, if these projects are indeed penciling out, then a case could be made that maybe the federal funding wasn't necessary in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, some folks are saying that, but I think that's not really the case. For starters, the lure of the federal dollars caused this whole kind of ecosystem to get mobilized, and Climate United and Justice Climate actually formed out of pre-existing organizations, but formed as new entities to be ready to absorb and distribute the greenhouse gas reduction fund. So just pulling them together was an achievement, and that still stands. And then the second part is that the more commercial deals that could be salvaged, the quickest are probably the ones that are the most conventional or flowing to the sort of least friction kind of marketplaces. And that what the GGRF money really was going to do was reach that down much deeper into communities, into low income communities, into disadvantaged communities, into kinds of deals that have been less familiar, less cookie cutter deals. And so I think that you can't discount the fact that that process will take a lot longer. But I think, as we've said, that the trends are there, the cost cutting and the cost saving potential is there, and I think the financing is there as well. So it could be that we build a more resilient system without federal funding. It just will take a lot longer.
And that's all assuming that the lawsuit against the Trump EPA is not successful.
Yeah, and I don't want to assume that because they had a very good trial court judge decision for an injunction. It got held up at the appeals court, and I guess they're waiting right now for the appeals court ruling. But there are many chapters in the legal battle to play out, and this was congressionally appropriated money, duly awarded by under a very rigorous process, and so there should still be something called the rule of law and due process. But what happens is anybody's guess at this point.
All right. Well, you can read the full write up about the call as well as a video replay of it on impactalpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. For now, let's take a quick break. When we come back, how European limited partners are still focused on the materiality of material risks. In the beginning of June, Berlin hosts the largest GPLP gathering in the world, the dual conferences known as Super Venture and Super Return. As Johannes Lenhard and Hannah Leach of Venture ESG wrote for us in Impact Alpha, despite the political pushback on ESG in the US, European investors are still focused on the full range of material risks in their investments. David, what do we learn about the view from Europe?
Yeah, it's good. People are talking a lot more about Europe in both geopolitical terms, but also now in this investment context as well. And as you said, this super returns in Berlin is kind of the place to take the pulse. And Johannes and Hannah were there, and it's a mad scene of, of finance bros and others strutting their stuff. And what's interesting is that ESG sustainability, while probably more on the back burner than in previous years, is still really almost what they called kind of hygiene now for European funds. It's like just kind of table stakes. It's, of course, you would look at your carbon footprint, your water usage, your pay scales, your gender equity, your gender representation, your governance mechanisms. Those are just things that anybody would do for due diligencing an investment. And so that's what we meant by those material risks, and those material factors are still material. They don't go away just because people have a kind of political stance against them. And I think that's more of just sort of accepted wisdom in Europe than and perhaps still more contested in the US.
So it doesn't matter what pushback happens in the US political context of around ESG and other labels, the kind of work continues under the hood.
Yeah, there are nuances, of course, right? So, one of the reasons why the investment situation is so hot in Europe now is because they've made a big push and a big commitment, both to green and clean energy, which is now being sold as energy sovereignty, as they try to sort of wean themselves from dependence not only on Russia but also on the U.S. and be able to sort of chart their own destiny in terms of power, and solar and wind is can't be cut off when a pipeline is sabotaged or cut off. And then secondly, on defense spending, which again is part of this kind of decoupling that's going on, and the Europeans have massively ramped up their own defense spending. And what's interesting is that the EU is busy kind of redefining defense spending as a sustainable investment, as literally an ESG investment, because it's seen as part of kind of the sovereignty agenda. And in fact, Euronext, which runs some of the stock exchanges, has been trying to literally rebrand ESG not as environmental, social, and governments, but as energy, security, and geostrategy.
Talk about a rebrand.
Yeah, there's more at it than just the sort of branding. I mean, what it sets in motion in Europe is the ability of some of these defense companies to get access to loans from financial institutions, and to remove some other sort of regulatory barriers and discrimination that the defense industry says discriminates against it.
So it's enabling access to capital to defense industry companies for investors that have certain ESG mandates.
Yeah, and basically saying that this do no harm clause around the EU regulations also, I guess, applies to don't get overrun by some powerful neighbors.
I understand there are also celebrity sightings at this Super Return conference, right?
Well, it's kind of a show, the Lollapalooza of private equity or something. Bono went on stage, from U2 with Jim Coulter, who's the head of TPG Rise, And Bono famously said, when TPG Rise was announced, I think about 8 years ago, that impact investing was good people doing bad deals. And now Coulter, who's kind of a convert to all this, and particularly climate investing, but also impact more broadly, said, no, this is not an investing for good. This is just good investing. So that kind of gave you a little bit of a sense of the vibe at Super Returns.
All right. Well, you can read Hannah's and Johannes's piece on the Berlin LP GP gatherings on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. For now, let's take one more quick break. When we come back, we'll discuss Taylor Swift, Ryan Coogler, and the emerging ownership economy in music and film. Look what you made them do. Musician Taylor Swift and filmmaker Ryan Coogler are demonstrating a theme we've been tracking for a while here at Impact Alpha, the ownership economy. As Mark Newberg reported for us this week, the two mega talents have recently received ownership stakes for their creative work. David, walk us through this emerging trend. Are the wildest dreams of ownership going to be a growing aspect of our economy, or do we need to calm down?
Well, I don't know if Swifties, will calm down. I just will take one issue, which is it wasn't received. I mean, for Taylor Swift, bought back the masters to her early works that she had lost some years back, lost control of some years back, and so it was seen as really a stake for kind of artistic autonomy, artistic independence, and she's really been a champion of that. In some sense against the studio system or the music industry more broadly. It's a little hard to always say a billionaire like Taylor Swift is kind of leading the charge for the little folks, but in this case, she's got her fan base that has backed her up on this, and it sort of is sort of maybe a bellwether for other artists, maybe not as well known, to be able to insist on similar deals. Ryan Coogler's deal was a little bit different, but for his movie Sinners, which some folks may have seen, I thought it was a terrific movie. He did negotiate to get the rights back for the movie after 25 years. That gives him streaming, licensing, merchandising revenues, and again, it's kind of a generational wealth, I guess, and a kind of way to reassert the primacy of the creative process. And again, it's not completely unheard of in the movie industry. I think what folks said is it got a lot more attention because it was a black director like Ryan Coogler who was able to cut that deal. But again, this is sort of a strike for the artists versus the finance folks and the studios.
And it's also just talking about the shifting power dynamics when you have mega talents like Coogler and Swift who have, very strong and rabid fan bases that will support them in these efforts.
And it does open up some interesting possibilities. And Mark, pointed this out. What if there was a studio that actually attracted talent on the basis of a better deal for artists, and reverted rights after 10 or 20 years, and cut folks in for ownership stakes earlier in the process. You might have a competitive advantage attracting talent these days, so you could quickly become a dominant studio. It's kind of like United Artists back in, I think, the 19 teens or 20s, and Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, D.W. Griffith, folks like that got together again. Artists are challenging the studio system. So this is kind of a constant battle, as you said, power dynamic in Hollywood and in entertainment, and maybe the pendulum is swinging again towards the artists as owners.
Right, as long as those artists are already super successful in the first place.
Well, or willing to go indie and take their chances.
There you go, betting on themselves. All right, well, you can read Mark Newberg's piece on Taylor Swift, Ryan Coogler, and the ownership economy on ImpactAlpha.com. There's also a link in our show notes. You can also weigh in on the conversation on our Slack channel that's exclusive for Impact Alpha subscribers. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of This Week in Impact. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Brian.
And thank you all for listening. This Week in Impact is a production of Impact Alpha and part of the Impact Alpha podcast network. Smart conversations by and for impact investing professionals. For exclusive stories and insights about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join thousands of other agents of impact by subscribing. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. Thanks, as always, to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For David Bank, I'm Brian Walsh, Managing Director of the strategic advisory firm Human Nature. We'll see you next week for more Impact.